Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Ryon Ownbey.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
Hey, pretty good. Nice to get a chance to talk to you, Molly.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on. So, can you tell me a little bit about your writing?
Well, really enjoy the process of writing books, in fact, because when you write a book, you have to look at it from a certain perspective of distance. So you're looking at something from the beginning and the end is how I start out, and then I spend a lot of time coming up with plot points in my mind even before I start writing them down. So the story comes to me long before I put a single word down on paper, and then when I finally decide to sit down and start writing, I like to have a notepad and a pen and write it longhand first. And for many years, I used your standard ballpoint pen where it seemed like I was working really hard to get those cheap pens scratching along. So I invested a couple of years ago into a Waterman Hemisphere rollerball pen where you have to replace the ink, and the barrel of the pen is very nice and smooth, and the ink comes out nice and smooth, and so that's been a lot of fun to just kind of glide across the page as I'm writing along. The thoughts seem to come out very, very nicely that way. And I want to say that it's important for me to write that way and to get as far away from technology as possible. I don't want to sound like the hermit on the hill, but getting away from all of the electricity and electronics that's going on, that seems to free up my thoughts and allows me to be more imaginative without having a sense of being rushed to do it. And so that's kind of how I go about things. Is I kind of have an idea of the beginning of the story. I kind of have an idea of how it should end, but then the fun part is filling in everything in between. And what scares me most about writing these days is uh, AI. So AI is
Ooh,
coming in, and everybody's taking that easy step towards AI. And I see a lot of writers out there who are frowning on the AI, and you see posts of it, and they have their frowny faces, and I'm right there with them because AI is a bad thing. It's a bad tool. It's as a writer, as a creative, you try to express yourself and get things out that way. We have kind of like someone building a house. If you build a house, you feel really good afterward because you've done the work yourself. You haven't had a robot come and build it for you, and you feel that sense of accomplishment. And so it's the same thing as building a book. If you have a robot do it, then what does that do for you? It's not a very rewarding process. It's not a very healthy process as far as I'm concerned. So I definitely encourage writers to stick with their own writing and not have a surrogate do it for them. And so, but anyway, so I've been really enjoying writing for many years. And so I guess that's what I have to say about that for now.
fantastic. So, I'm curious, where do you get inspiration for your stories when you're still in that stage where you're kind of plotting out that beginning, middle, and end before you've started officially writing?
Yeah, so I think the way that I go about doing that is after I finish one project, I'm pretty tired of that because I've explored every avenue there is in that particular subject. So I try to proliferate or be prolific in my writing in a way that allows me to go to a different genre that I haven't explored yet. And so it's like exploring a new, country or a new area that you haven't entered into. I think the thing that draws me to certain subjects are just questions that we all ask ourselves. In the example of my book, Three Evil Ghosts, are asking about what's the spiritual world about, and how do I confront that, and how do I deal with that? And so I know we don't have all of our spiritual questions answered because we're just kind of put on this world to kind of figure it out for ourselves. And so it's that process of figuring out what I think it's supposed to be. And in this case, making it, putting a twist to it in that the ghosts are not happy go lucky. They're actually not happy at all. They're quite upset that they're no longer living. So
So can you tell me actually a little bit more about that book, Three Evil Ghosts? Can you just give a little description for the audience?
Sure. It's takes place in a small town in actually North Idaho because I'm from Idaho originally, but it could take place in any small town in the United States. And it's about just some people there living their lives. Some of the main characters are first year English teacher, a girl in college who meets him. They kind of have a little romance there, and just this small innocent town. And I think that's what we are here in America, these small towns that we have. We're not really interested in what's going on in the cities as much. We're just living our own lives and doing our own thing, and enjoying our own peace and tranquility. And then when that peace and tranquility gets disturbed, then how do we react to that? And not just something from the city, but something from the spiritual world in this case, and something that threatens to destroy their peace. And so it's just a group of regular old folks who now have to deal with some missing um, high school students who have gone out hiking one weekend. They haven't come back. Why haven't they come back? What's going on with that? We have to find them. And the initial search doesn't go well. They can't find them. And so what do we do now? And so do we continue looking for them? And so now everybody's not everybody, but this small group of people who are friends with these um, missing kids are searching for what has happened to them. And in that secondary search, then they come across some evil ghosts from history, some famous folks that you probably already know. So, mhm.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing. So, what I'm curious now is how did you get your start writing, just in general?
Well, I started when I was about 11 years old, and I'm much older than 11 now. And so I've been writing for many years. I haven't been writing books for many years, but I've been writing stories and screenplays, and just seems to be something I have to do as a creative. So some people paint, some people draw, some people take photographs. I have to write stories. And so at 11, I was kind of trying to find an outlet for what was getting built up in my mind as an imagination. It seemed like I had more imagination than some of the other kids that I knew, and I had to figure a way to get that out. Do you have to get your thoughts out of your head somehow? And I ran into my grandmother's typewriter from the 1950s that she had used in college. And so this would have been back in the 80s when I found it. And I I realized I could press these keys down, and these hammers would come out like forceful. It looked like an actual work that was happening. It was an organic thing. It was like using a hammer. Okay,
Mhm.
so if you use an old school typewriter and you're pressing down hard enough to strike the paper and leave a letter or a word, then it felt to me like I wasn't just messing around. I wasn't just wasting my time. I was actually creating something, because if you take a hammer and you pound a nail, then you're putting two boards together. If you take a hammer off of a typewriter and pound a piece of paper, you're putting a word there for people to see, and it's done organically, and it's done in a way that you see it physically happening. So you're doing the physical work. And I come from a family that has always been about physical work, and so that was my excuse to both get the imagination out and do physical work at the same time. So I felt like I had an excuse to do it.
That is so interesting. I also have a typewriter right over there in my room.
Great.
And I remember being a kid and having that experience where you see it and it's like, oh my gosh, it almost gives the same feeling as like painting a picture or something. It's totally different than writing onto a computer or even writing longhand.
Sure. Sure. You feel like for me, it was just, I was building something. And so that's a good feeling. Like you're really putting the physical effort into it. Cause it's not as easy to press your fingers down on a typewriter keyboard than it is on a computer keyboard. On a computer keyboard, you just barely tap it and there's your letter. On a typewriter, you really got to use the muscles in your fingers to make that happen. And I haven't done it for a long time. I still have that typewriter, by the way.
Oh
And
yeah.
so, yeah, it's sitting in my garage, and So I could get it out sometime. I just need to probably order a new ribbon, but I'm sure it would work. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, what does a typical writing day look like for you?
Well, it's with as busy as I am, I can't do it every day. I would love to do it every day, but I don't even know if I could do it every day. There are some days, to be quite honest, there are some days when I don't feel like writing at all. I feel like going out and building up my imagination, getting and reading books. Okay, that's important to get your imagination going, but also the stuff that I come up with. I feel like if I write every day, then I'm not giving myself enough time to build up what is going to come out later. And so I usually take a few days a week just to think, just to decide what's going to happen next. And that just happens without even thinking about it. I don't consciously say, okay, now I'm going to think about this book and this is what I'm going to think about. It just comes to me and the thoughts are there. Now I got to figure out how to get them out of me and onto the paper as quickly as possible and as organically as possible to be as true to the writing. So that's why I do use the longhand. But on a day where I do sit down and write, which is at least 4 days a week, sometimes 5 days a week, I will just the problem that I heard in high school was my writing teacher had said, so how long do you guys prepare to before you start writing? What do you need to do? Do you have to watch TV? And watch something? Do you have to read? Do you set up for it? And one kid, it might have been me, said, yeah, I have to get a snack and I have to, watch an hour of this TV show, MTV or whatever it was at the time, music videos, or I have to do all these things. And then she said, well, that's your problem. If you have to put all these things in front of what you're going to actually write, um, you know, and that wouldn't include the thought process of building up before you write, but just to sit there and do other things, then you're wasting time. You need to actually sit down and do it. And I don't think a lot of writers do that. Just sit down and do it. Just do it. Just do it. And that's the important thing, is just sit down there and do it. And then once you get into that zone of writing, and it's the creative zone, I call it that. A lot of people do. Um, then the world around you becomes annoying, that tries to disturb your process. So if you're right in the middle of a really neat dialogue exchange, let's say, or a really nice description of scenery or something where you're really in there, you're in that description and you're in that pretend world that you've created and you can see it all around you, and then someone knocks on your door right in the middle of it. It's almost like they reached into your imagination, into your forest where you're standing out looking at the trees and the beautiful flower groves, and they've grabbed your arm and pulled you back onto the concrete, and that can be frustrating. So that's another reason to stay away from everything when you're writing. And it can, I guess people can kind of get lonely that way. I'm away from everything, but you just got to realize that you're not going to be in there all the time. But when you are, you have to be a way to be true to your imagination.
Yeah. I do think it is interesting how everyone has such a different like ritual or process that they use to get into that headspace. Because I have talked to a lot of people on this show where they have all the things like what you were saying before, where you have to have the room set up a certain way, you have to have the right music playing, you have to have the right everything. But there are a lot that just need quiet. Oh, and I've also talked to some that need kind of chaotic environments to write and need to be like out and about and then write in the cracks of that. And I think it's just goes to show how unique everyone's experience is for
Yeah,
sure.
I would say for me, it's probably a meditative type of music, no matter what genre from the world, whether it's Japanese or Western or whatever type of music, but something that doesn't have words. It
Mhm.
could be classical, but not too fast. So, I've heard Stephen King needs rock and roll, but I need smooth, relaxing, not drone music, but just something that's soothing. Yeah.
Interesting. So do you have a favorite scene that you've ever written?
Well, I don't know if I have an absolute favorite one, but there's one that comes to mind that was the most enjoyable when it was finished after all the research I had done and the interaction I had created. There's a scene in the Three Evil Ghosts book where the main character, who's a history teacher, world history, he confronts the ghost of John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of Abraham Lincoln, and the research I had to do to find out how Booth would most likely speak and how he would most likely act, and then what knowledge am I going to give to that history teacher in order to combat that. And so um, Booth, who was an actor in life, then becomes an actor in the afterlife, but he also is aware now and acting now after he has committed this assassination of Lincoln. And I think he died just a couple days after he killed Lincoln. He died in a barn, and there's been speculation on that. Did he really die? Did they, some people say they found kept his body somewhere. I don't know, but as far as I know, he died in the barn, and so, but he was aware of he had killed Lincoln, and so how is he going to behave? And so he's got a African American girl who he has tied up, and he's going to use her soul to perpetuate his existence or the existence of friends of his who also died. It's kind of a dichotomy in the book, or it's a thing where these ghosts are collecting souls, and so he's collecting hers, or trying to anyway. And so this English teacher, or not English, this history teacher shows up and has to find a way to send Booth back to the spiritual realm and away from the earth. And so when I was a kid, my grandma, my great grandma, who was my dad's father's mother, she was born in 1899. We actually have a video recording of her reciting from memory the Gettysburg Address. And so the thing that the history teacher did was he wanted to get Booth excited about giving a performance. And so in the middle of the forest where there's a clear-cut area, Booth gets up on a stump and gives a speech from Macbeth, and is so happy about his performance. Gets up there, puts his cane up in the air, swings his famous derringer around, and gives this resounding Macbeth speech. And then the teacher thinks, well, how am I gonna outdo that? And so he says, well, I've got one for you. Oh, I want to hear it, says Booth. And so he speaks from memory. The main character does the Gettysburg Address. And on top of, make other ways of making Booth feel guilty, he is just the last thing he ever thought he would hear again was this speech in its entirety. And the Gettysburg Address, if you don't know, which I'm sure you do, but yes, and so that's about it's anti-slavery and anti all things bad in the world. And so the main character is able to use that he is, and I described that he learned it from his grandmother. So that was a parallel from my life to the book, was that this teacher had also learned this Gettysburg Address from his grandmother. And then Booth, something happens to him. He goes away. You'll have to read it to find out.
I love that. I think that it's those little details that really can add so much to a novel and bring so much more texture to a story. That is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of on that same topic, how did you decide what to keep and what to change when writing about these ghosts?
Well, I think it was just probably who is the most interesting people from history I can find, and who's the most accessible to folks' memories, and who are they going to remember. There's some evils from history that have happened too close to our time in the 19th century. So 1950s, 60s, 70s, whatever. And I think that's too close to today to put those in there and deal with those, because there's still people living from that time. And so I went back past where people were living, and I said, where's some people from history from books? And that's the only way we can see them. And that we haven't, no one on earth now has seen them today or in the past in their life. And then I go and find the most interesting characters from the past and who've had the most resounding impact on people, not only in our country, but around the world. So I chose Vlad the Impaler, who is Dracula. The Halloween Dracula is based on him. Bram Stoker, the book writer, based his Dracula on him. So he didn't, in the book, he doesn't even know that he's been portrayed as a modern day vampire because he's been dead. So that becomes a revelation to him. So even though he's a bad person, he finds it humorous that the world knows him as a vampire now, as we know, a cartoon type vampire these days after Stoker got a hold of him. And then the other one is Elizabeth Bathory, and she apparently she had a really nice upbringing. She had a nice childhood, learned a bunch of languages, and then when she got older, she just changed. She mentally something broke, and she decided that she should bathe in the blood of virgins, and that would keep her youthful appearance. Well, obviously that didn't work out too well, and everybody around said, "Well, you're obviously crazy, so we're going to put you in a tower, and that's where you're going to rot and die." And she did. And so it was fun to go back and kind of touch on some of those experiences with these characters and how they would react to the memory of those experiences, and how this history teacher has to get his friends out of this situation and then rescue the missing high school kids. And one thing that was kind of fun with the Bathory characters, I was able to use two different types of language with her. I used the English because she wants to talk to one of the main characters, and of course in a book, as we read, we know how most people, not most people, but a lot of the person who buys a book in English is going to know how to speak English. So she's speaking in English, but she also speaks in Hungarian. And so in the book, it's described as she's speaking in two voices. So she's speaking in English. I have that. And then right next to it, or right below it at the same time, she has another voice that echoes through the forest in Hungarian that's much more sinister and booming with bass, and so that makes her very intimidating. And then there's a nice interaction, like I said, with Vlad the Impaler. He gets a hold of a attractive young lady who he wants to make his wife or herself. He's giving her a decision: you can either be my wife, or I'm going to use your soul to resurrect the wife that I had, who killed herself back when I was alive, and the one that he loved more than the others. And so those interactions, like I said, from the past of what they're experiencing that we have seen, but they didn't see during their lifetimes because they died before it was to be seen. And so I don't. So that's about the end of that question.
That is fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now that we know about what you write about, how you write, where you get your ideas, I want to know what you read. And before we got on the episode, you were telling me a little bit about how it's some sort of specific genre. Can you share some of that for the audience?
Yeah, I seem to, I like all kinds of books. I mean, every type. I like Louis L'Amour. I like, Stephen King, of course. Everybody does, who likes the horror genres anyway. I like adventure books. Just about every kind of book, children's books, anything I can get my hands on to see how that person told the story. But the one genre that I seem to come back to every few years, and I'll leave it alone for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden I just get drawn right back into it as new authors write new books about it, is historic adventure tragedies. So that would be like Arctic explorers who say we're going to go to the South Pole, or we're going to go to the North Pole. Real stories, nonfiction. And then they go up there, or they go down there, whichever way they're going, and they don't make it. And so they get stuck in the ice, and they run out of food, and they're in dire straits, and how are they going to get out of this? And it's very intense as far as the days are dragging on, and you just feel like you're right there in the ice with them, and it's so cold, and how are they going to do things differently than the last group of folks that experience the same thing? And that's not just to say on ships going to the North and South Pole. There's also a book called The White Cascade, which was about a railroad up here in Northwest Washington. I live in Washington these days, Washington State. that got snowed in the early 1900s, and they had to dig out the avalanche and everything. And so, what I enjoy most about those books are, okay, or say, so you have characters in real life. This isn't fiction, and you get to learn about what do they do to try to get out of the problem that they have. How do they solve that problem? And would they have died sooner if they hadn't thought about this, or would they have lived longer if they'd thought about something else? And how do men interact with each other as they're in dire straits? How do their characters change when they started out a certain way? Let's say they start out all jovial and we're going on an adventure, and then they get up there and, hey, we're going to be out of food like tomorrow. How do they change? How does that make and it's not certainly not a situation I would ever want to be in, but it's just so interesting to and so engaging to read about these interactions, and how they more often than not they perish. But it was the idea that we're going to go on this adventure, we're going to go do things that no man has ever done before. And so, I think that can echo into our future as well, as we try to explore space and things like that. We're going to do our best. We got to find out what else is out there, and some people are probably going to die. And but how does that process shake out as it goes along? That's
I think I have a new genre of books to check out because those sound amazing. Thank
that's
you for telling
well,
everybody about that. Can you share your top like two or three from that genre?
yes. I actually wrote a list today in anticipating that you might ask me that. And so a few of them are called, so Labyrinth of Ice, The Triumphant and Tragic Greeley Polar Expedition, In the Kingdom of Ice, The Grand and Terrible Polar Voyage of the USS Jeannette, Fatal North, Murder and Survival on the First North Pole Expedition, The White Cascade, which is the Great Northern Railway Disaster and America's Deadliest Avalanche. Dead Mountain is the untold true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. And the first one of those books that I read was Fatal North, Murder and Survival of on the First North Pole Expedition. And that had a argument about who was the first to reach the North Pole. History says it was one guy, but this writer seems to think it's somebody else. And there was a big controversy going on back in the early 1900s on who got to the North Pole first. And then the first book I would recommend that anybody read, if they're interested in this genre or wanting to kind of break into it, one that won't disappoint in any way, is called Into Thin Air by John Krakauer. And that is a hike up Mount Everest that went very wrong, and there was a blizzard, and many groups of folks were trying to get to the top and get back down, and happened in 1996, so not that long ago. I actually remember when it happened, but then the book came out and I'm like, wow, that's what happened. So yeah, Into Thin Air by John Krakauer, that would be number one for me, probably. All right.
Fantastic. Well, that was actually all the time we had for today, but thank you so much for coming on the show. I just have one more question, and that's what do you have coming up?
All right. Well, I'm glad you asked me that. I am working on a children's book called Little Dog Turpie and the Hobby Oz. And this is an old story. It's usually just called the Hobby Oz, but in the 1980s, my mother's mother used to tell us little grandkids late night stories to put us to sleep. And so she would tell us the story of Little Dog Turpie and the Hobby Oz. And this is a story about little men who come out of a cave, and they're going to go down a hill and eat up the little old lady, carry off the little old man, tear down the little old shack. And this is an old story from long ago. I don't know if you've heard of Beverly Cleary.
Oh, yeah.
So I read her biography, and I read this recently. When she was a little girl, she read a book in the 19 teens called The Hobby Oz. And it was a book of folk tales. And of all the folk tales in that book, about 50 of them, that was the one that she couldn't re- keep from reading over and over and over. Her mom had to take the book away from her. And so I had never heard of that story until my grandma told me about it and the other grandkids in the 80s. It is in the public domain, like Little Red Riding Hood or something along those lines. And so I do have the freedom to kind of create my own story about it. But what I'm going to do is take my grandmother's rendition of it. And there's been different tellings of it over the years. Like there'll be more dogs in one story. Maybe there's a little girl in one story. Or maybe the Habiyas are like this. Maybe they're like that. They're little men like small Bigfoots or something like that. And so that's the story. I've hired a illustrator to make some nice, colorful, cute pictures. And it is a children's book, even though it seems kind of harsh with some of the language, but I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'm almost done with it. So with the artist is almost done with his work, and then I'll write an afterward talking about how I heard the story and show a picture of my grandma and we'll go from there.
Well, that is absolutely so exciting and so cool. I hope that everyone listening to this goes and checks out all of your books and watches for anything upcoming like that incredible stunning children's book.
Well, I really appreciate it. And thank you for your time for talking to me today.
Thank you. For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
And I'm Ryon Ownbey.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.